I want you to imagine a habit for a second. Just picture a routine that is so demonstrably dangerous to your physical health that it carries the exact same mortality risk as smoking up to 15 cigarettes every single day.
Yeah, which is a massive risk.
Right. And you hear that, and your mind immediately jumps to a tangible substance, right? Like you picture the smoke, the warning labels on the box, the tar building up in the lungs.
Of course. That's where we all go.
But what if this incredibly lethal habit wasn't a substance you could hold in your hand? What if it was, simply a state of being?
I mean, it forces a complete paradigm shift in how we approach public health because we are deeply, deeply conditioned to view health threats as external invaders.
Like a virus.
Exactly. A virus crossing a cell wall, a chemical toxin, a known carcinogen, right? So the realization that an internal emotional state could initiate the exact same cascade of physiological damage as heavy chain smoking is, well, it's jarring.
It really is.
It demands a total reevaluation of what fundamental self-care actually entails.
And that paradigm shift is the core mission for this deep dive, because we are going to unpack the hidden mechanical realities of adult loneliness. We're going way beyond just the surface level emotion to explore why our brains actively trap us in this state of isolation, despite how dangerous it actually is.
Right, the brain works against us here.
It totally does. And crucially, we're going to look at what evidence-based solutions actually work to break that cognitive cycle. We are pulling from a massive stack of data today.
A really comprehensive stack, yeah.
Yeah, including recent stark warnings from the U.S. Surgeon General, broad clinical meta-analyses on social behavior, and the actual frontline therapeutic frameworks utilized by coping and healing counseling, which is a telehealth practice operating out of Georgia.
And having that layered source material is just vital because society's standard operating procedure for dealing with loneliness is almost entirely backward.
Completely back.
Yeah. The data from the macro-level public health advisories all the way down to the micro-level clinical interactions reveals that everything we instinctively tell isolated people to do actually worsens the condition.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we have to start with the medical reality of social disconnection. Society still largely treats this like, I don't know, a fleeting, sad feeling you get on a quiet Friday night.
Like a bummer, basically.
Right. But the 2023 U.S. Surgeon General Advisory on Loneliness and Social Connection just stripped away that illusion entirely. The clinical findings link social disconnection to a 29% higher risk of heart disease.
29%.
We are talking about the cardiovascular system actively deteriorating. And right alongside that is a 32% higher risk of stroke.
Yeah, and when you trace the mechanism behind those percentages, you realize loneliness puts the nervous system into a state of chronic low-grade emergency.
Like a constant stroke.
Exactly. The body is endlessly pumping out stress hormones. And that leads to arterial inflammation and heightened blood pressure. The mortality effect driving those stroke and heart disease numbers is exactly what equates to that 15 cigarette a day metric.
Wow.
So an individual sitting in a doctor's office admitting they're profoundly lonely, I mean, that is a massive medical disclosure.
Yet the contrast in how society handles these two identical mortality risks is just staggering. We treat smoking with aggressive, graphic warning labels on every pack, right? We apply heavy taxation at the register to deter the habit, and we fund massive public health campaigns.
We treat it like a killer.
We treat smoking like the killer the data proves it to be. Meanwhile, loneliness is relegated to this minor personal quirk. It's the punchline of a joke about being a cat lady, or like a sitcom trope about a grumpy old neighbor.
Which completely minimizes the danger.
It really does. We do not treat a lack of human connection like a habit that is actively destroying human arteries.
And because society treats it as a minor behavioral quirk, the medical and social apparatus just hasn't known how to triage it. So to correct that blind spot, we have to look under the hood at the cognitive machinery.
The mechanics of it.
Right. Because unlike a cigarette, which requires a conscious physical choice to light up, loneliness operates like a self-perpetuating virus in the brain. It's an internal condition that actively builds defenses to protect its own existence.
And since the condition defends itself, the mechanics of how it operates are, well, they're insidious. The clinical frameworks from coping and healing counseling detail what is known as the loneliness trap.
Such an important concept.
It really is. It is a mechanical cycle of social withdrawal. And if you've ever found yourself staring at your phone, agonizing over a text message, this cycle is going to sound terrifyingly familiar to you. It starts with the initial feeling of disconnection. because you feel disconnected and vulnerable, you decide to turn down an invitation to a dinner or some social event.
And turning down that invitation provides this brief, immediate hit of relief. The brain feels like it just dodged a bullet.
Like you just survived something dangerous.
Exactly. But that short-term relief comes at a incredibly heavy long-term cost, because staying home leaves you even more disconnected than you were yesterday. So when the next invitation comes around next week, the psychological hurdle to say yes is significantly higher.
And it's not like you're just chilling at home either. While you were sitting there after declining that invitation, the brain doesn't just power down and relax. It engages in a state of hypervigilance to social threat.
Yes, the looping.
The leaping. If you want to know what this looks like in practice, it is the relentless replaying of past interactions. You are isolated on your couch, and your brain is playing back a totally mundane conversation you had at the grocery store 3 days ago, looping it for hours.
Over and over.
Right. You are hunting for the exact microscopic moment where you said the wrong thing, just scanning your own memories for evidence that you were too much.
And that hypervigilance is cognitively almost indistinguishable from social anxiety.
Really?
Oh, yeah. In clinical environments, the two heavily co-occur. The isolated brain is treating social interaction not as an opportunity for warmth or connection, but as a hostile minefield. It scans every facial expression, every slight pause in conversation, and interprets them all as confirmation of rejection.
Which brings up a really critical distinction in the data that shatters a very common misconception. There is a massive gap between contact and connection.
Huge gap.
Right, because a person can be completely surrounded by people, like sitting in a bustling open-plan office all week, attending a packed church on Sunday, living in a house full of relatives, and still be profoundly, agonizingly lonely.
Absolutely.
It is not about the sheer volume of human bodies in your vicinity.
No, you can have a calendar bursting with meetings, coffees, and social obligations, and yet remain entirely starved for genuine connection. Because loneliness is a subjective cognitive state. It's not an objective metric of physical proximity.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on this, or at least ask a genuine question about the logic here, because it feels like a massive biological paradox to me.
Okay, what's the paradox?
Well, if a person is biologically starving for connection, like to the point where their heart and brain are enduring physical damage, why does the brain execute the exact opposite of what it desperately needs?
Ah, I see what you mean.
Right, because if you are physically starving, you eat the food in front of you. Why, when we are starving for connection, do we push the invitations away and self-sabotage?
What's fascinating here is that to understand this paradox, you really have to look at evolutionary biology and how the human nervous system actually defines safety.
Okay, evolutionary biology.
Right. Think about our ancient ancestors on the savannah. Being separated from the tribe wasn't just sad for them, it was an immediate death sentence.
Because you're prey.
Exactly. A lone human is prey. So when we experience prolonged social isolation today, the primitive parts of the brain don't just register sadness, they register an acute existential vulnerability. The nervous system spikes into hyperarousal to scan for predators.
The brain literally thinks it is being hunted.
Precisely. It thinks it's being hunted. And in a modern context, the quote-unquote predator becomes further social rejection.
Oh, wow.
So the hyper-aroused brain calculates that the risk of going to the party, saying something awkward, and being officially permanently cast out of the group is a far greater threat to your immediate survival than simply staying home and remaining invisible.
It's trying to save your life.
The brain is trying to protect you from the fatal blow of total rejection. But in doing so, it locks you in solitary confinement. It chooses the slow starvation of isolation because it is terrified of the immediate threat of the social minefield.
That is just, it's mind-blowing. And because the brain is actively treating social interaction as a mortal threat, the standard advice society throws at lonely people is actually pushing them directly into their own tripwires.
100%.
Which brings us to the absolute myth of just getting out more. When someone confesses they're feeling isolated, the knee-jerk reaction from well-meaning friends is almost always, oh, you just need to put yourself out there. Join a club, go to a meetup, just get out more.
And the clinical meta-analyses on loneliness interventions completely dismantle that advice. I mean, they tear it apart. When researchers evaluate decades of data across numerous studies, they consistently find that simply providing more social opportunities is not the most effective intervention.
It just doesn't work.
No. Flooding an isolated person's calendar with social events does not solve the underlying pathology.
The data shows that even professional referrals to a general support group are often insufficient on their own because the root issue isn't a lack of people. The root issue is what the clinical frameworks refer to as maladaptive social cognitions.
That's the clinical term for it, yeah.
Right. And it sounds like we're talking about a damaged filter in the brain that automatically takes any neutral social cue and twists it into proof that everyone in the room dislikes you. Is that essentially what's happening?
That is the exact mechanism. Maladaptive social cognitions are these deeply ingrained automatic assumptions about how others perceive us. It's the internal monologue running in the background constantly saying, they think I'm boring, or they only invited me out of pity.
Just constant negativity.
Constant. And if a person is operating through that maladaptive filter, you can place them in the most welcoming, vibrant social environment on Earth.
Yeah.
And their brain will still selectively cherry-pick data to confirm the threat of rejection.
Right. Like if someone yawns.
Yes. Someone yawning because they worked a 12-hour shift is instantly interpreted as, oh, I am boring them to death.
It's like, think about someone who is completely paralyzingly terrified of the ocean. Their brain has convinced them the water is swarming with monsters and they will instantly drown.
Great analogy.
Telling a chronically lonely person to just get out more is the exact equivalent of taking that person who is terrified of the ocean, throwing them into the deep end without a life jacket and yelling, just enjoy the water.
Right. Have fun.
It doesn't cure their phobia. It validates their panic, spikes their heart rate, and basically ensures they never go near the beach again.
Because you haven't addressed the internal threat detection system, you just forced them into the environment that triggers it. This is why sheer exposure therapy, just forcing social interaction, it fails. To break the cycle, clinicians have to get inside that cognitive machinery and systematically rewire those maladaptive thoughts.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because this is a deeply entrenched cognitive issue, the solution requires moving into specific, evidence-based treatments. According to the clinical approach used by coping and healing counseling, this requires cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, combined with something called behavioral activation.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, CBT is the methodical process of identifying and challenging those automatic thoughts. Going back to your ocean analogy, CBT is the process of sitting safely on the beach with a therapist and examining the fear before ever touching the water.
Cool.
So when the patient says, if I go to this dinner, everyone will think I'm awkward, the therapist stops the loop and demands evidence. What tangible proof do you have that they will think that? Did someone explicitly say that, or is your hypervigilance assuming it?
Wow. You are basically forcing the logical brain to overpower the hyper-aroused survival brain.
Exactly.
And then behavioral activation steps in as the physical component of that rewiring. From the source material, behavioral activation isn't just a vague directive to do things. It involves scheduling incredibly small, manageable micro-interactions.
Micro-interactions are key.
Right, so the homework isn't to attend a massive gala. The homework might be to go to the grocery store, make 2 seconds of eye contact with the cashier, say hello, and leave.
Because you are running controlled micro-experiments. You have to prove to the nervous system that social contact does not result in a mortal threat. And you do that repeatedly until the hypervigilance slowly dials down.
It's important to highlight a crucial clinical boundary here, though. The source data emphasizes that because this severe hypervigilance and isolation are so heavily intertwined with depressive disorders, treating this often requires a formal assessment for co-occurring major depression.
Yes, and that diagnosis and assessment belongs strictly to licensed clinicians.
Of course.
While we are exploring the mechanics of these conditions today, no outcome guarantees are ever made in clinical practice. Anyone experiencing these symptoms, whether it's the chronic withdrawal, the hypervigilance, or depressive episodes, they should seek evaluation from a qualified, licensed professional.
Right. But understanding the clinical treatment is really only half the battle. We have to talk about the sheer logistical weight of getting that treatment.
Oh, the logistics are a massive hurdle.
Huge. If you have a person who is already trapped in a self-perpetuating cycle of social withdrawal, someone whose nervous system views the outside world as a literal threat, who can barely muster the energy to check their mailbox.
Yeah.
The idea of them driving 45 minutes across town, navigating traffic, and sitting in a crowded clinic waiting room to do intensive CBT is a massive, often insurmountable ask. The psychological friction is simply too high.
The delivery mechanism of the therapy literally becomes the bottleneck. If the patient's hypervigilance prevents them from overcoming the friction to get to the clinic, well, the healthcare system has to find a way to get the clinic to the patient.
And this brings us to how modern telehealth models are stepping in to bridge that exact gap. Coping and healing counseling serves as a phenomenal case study for removing this friction. They operate a 100% HIPAA-compliant telehealth practice, reaching all 159 counties in the state of Georgia.
The geographical impact of covering all 159 counties is profound, particularly when you look at rural demographics.
Why is that?
Well, in deeply rural environments, the baseline risk of social isolation is already statistically elevated just by the nature of the geography. You are physically further away from community hubs. Compounding that risk, the provider density, meaning the actual number of licensed specialists within a reasonable driving distance, is incredibly low.
Right, so it is a perfect storm for the loneliness trap to take hold and fester. You are isolated by the miles between houses, and there is no specialist nearby to help you rewire the cognitive trap you are stuck in.
Exactly.
Telehealth essentially acts as a backdoor past the brain's defense systems. You don't have to brave the quote-unquote threat of a waiting room. The therapy meets you inside your own safe zone. And looking at CHC's structure, they've built a formidable team to deliver this. They have over 15 licensed therapists, including licensed clinical social workers, licensed professional counselors, and licensed marriage and family therapists.
And having a diverse and culturally competent team of that scale is critical. Because, as we've noted, social disconnection doesn't happen in a vacuum. It bleeds into every facet of life.
That makes sense.
That is why their services span individual therapy, couples and family counseling, and teen therapy for ages 13 and up, alongside life coaching. Adolescents are particularly vulnerable to social hypervigilance right now, and treating the family dynamic is often necessary to break the cycle.
The specialties they focus on map perfectly onto the intersecting conditions we've been dissecting too, like anxiety, depression, trauma, and PTSD, grief, relationships, and stress.
All interconnected.
Yeah. If adult loneliness is fundamentally intertwined with social anxiety and depressive disorders, having specialists in those exact areas available via video call is a literal lifeline. But there's one final massive wall we have to address, and it's the excuse the anxious brain uses most often: the financial barrier.
Historically, specialized cognitive therapy has been highly cost prohibitive. For a massive segment of the population, particularly those in lower income brackets where the stress of survival already limits social bandwidth, the cost of therapy just deepens the isolation.
When you look at the logistical side of coping and healing counseling, you realize they've built their financial model specifically to dismantle that final wall. They've partnered with almost every major commercial insurance plan, so whether a patient has Aetna, Cigna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare, or Humana, a session typically runs between just $10 and $40.
That's incredibly accessible.
It is. But more importantly, they have set Medicaid copays to absolute zero. If you are in Georgia, reaching out to them at chictherapy.com or giving them a call at 404-832-0102 removes that final excuse your brain is using to avoid getting help. You can even bypass the phone anxiety entirely and just shoot an email to support@chictherapy.com.
That financial accessibility is the linchpin of the whole operation. You take a public health crisis that is deteriorating cardiovascular systems at the same rate as a heavy smoking habit. You remove the geographical barrier through secure telehealth, and you remove the financial barrier with $0 Medicaid copays.
It changes everything.
It creates a direct, frictionless route for evidence-based intervention, delivering the antidote straight into the environment where the patient feels safest.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, completely reframing how we view a very common human experience. We started by confronting the blunt medical reality that adult loneliness is not just a passing mood, but a lethal state of being that taxes the body like chain-smoking 15 cigarettes a day. We dissected the evolutionary glitch of the loneliness trap, where our nervous systems mistake modern social missteps for mortal threats, locking us in a hypervigilant cycle of withdrawal.
We also dismantled the harmful, simplistic advice to just get out more, recognizing that throwing a socially terrified person into a crowded room only validates their internal alarms. Instead, breaking the cycle requires targeting those maladaptive social cognitions with methodical, evidence-based treatments like cognitive behavioral therapy and behavioral activation.
And finally, we explored how modern healthcare is adapting to this crisis. By utilizing accessible telehealth models, like the infrastructure built by Coping and Healing Counseling in Georgia, we can finally bypass the geographical and financial friction that keeps vulnerable people isolated, bringing specialized care directly to the living room.
This raises an important question, and it is one I want to direct specifically to you, the listener. As you navigate your schedule this week, I want you to look closely at your own behavioral patterns. When you find yourself declining an invitation to connect or slowly pulling back from a social circle, ask yourself honestly, are you declining because you are genuinely exhausted and need to recharge your batteries? Or are you declining because you are caught in the early stages of the loneliness trap, letting an underlying hypervigilance quietly dictate your choices?
Maintaining that level of self-awareness is your first line of defense. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over on your own. We've spent this time establishing that adult loneliness is driven by this intense hypervigilance, these automatic, deeply ingrained negative assumptions about how other people are judging us and perceiving our worth.
Right.
If that hyper-aroused threat detection is the true engine of isolation, I want you to think about our modern, highly curated, and filter-heavy digital culture. How much is the current social media landscape a place where every image is edited for perfection, every life milestone is broadcast for comparison, and every single human interaction is reduced to a public metric of likes and views, silently acting as a massive accelerator for that exact social anxiety?
That is a terrifying thought.
Is it possible that the very glowing rectangles we stare into, the platforms we use to trick our brains into feeling momentarily connected, are actually just turning up the dial on our hypervigilance? Are they feeding those maladaptive cognitions with an endless stream of impossible standards, quietly making us more isolated, more inadequate, and more terrified of genuine human contact than ever before?
It's definitely something to consider.
It's a heavy thought, but an essential one to explore. We started today by talking about a habit as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Maybe it's time we start looking at the screens in our hands and the artificial isolation they can breed with the exact same level of caution as a warning label on a pack of smokes. Keep learning, stay curious, and take care of yourselves out there.